It's so hard. Okay. So as we start, I'm going to bring you back to the PowerPoint that we were talking about last week, and we're going to finish that up. The first thing I'd like for you to do on your little scratch paper, hopefully you have scratch paper or you printed out the slides and are putting some notes to the side. And yeah, mute your mics if you have your mics.
I think the interpreter Emily's mic is on, and so
she's gone now. Yeah, I think it's still there. Okay, I think we got it. So can I close that and it still be recording? Okay. So we're going to go back to that. And what I want you to do is on your own, one of the things I asked you to think about, remember, and be able to do is draw the normal bell curve. So remember we had the curve that looks like this, that high stakes testing, move back and forth, slide it. Oh, whose mic is on? So see if you can draw it. And when you can draw it, then don't forget that you have some percentages that go in there, right? So we're looking for the mean being the middle, and then there were percentages that move down that curve. So take a second, and I'm going to pull up the PowerPoint, but take a second and see what you can draw. Then, after you've done that, notice what you can't draw. So that'll
Laura Longoria
to know what you
has joined the meeting.
All right. Here we go.
Can you repeat what you said, please? Sorry, it was kind of hard to hear you.
Sure. So what I asked you guys to do is to take a minute and see if you can draw the normal bell curve. So what a normalized or typical bell curve looks like. So you're going to have the arc. Then underneath it, remember there's the mean, which is your middle. And from that middle, we move standard deviations positive and standard deviations negative. There are percentages that go in there. And I asked you guys to remember that bell curve, remember the bell curve. So I want you to see what you can draw and then notice what you can't, what you're not sure about. So that when you go back to study, you'll say, oh, I couldn't do this on the day that Dr. Wilson said to. Everybody hearing okay now? All right, Cindy, I got you. Okay, so just as a quick reminder, this is what I'm wanting you to be able to do. So, mute your mics, whoever came in. So when you're thinking about how a formal assessment works, when you're thinking about how a normalized bell curve works, this is what you should be thinking about. This is something that you should be able to draw. This is something that when somebody starts talking about the STAR test, you should say, oh my gosh, the STAR test will always be looking for this kind of curve. Any of your high stakes testing that involves something that you're putting forth, effort you're putting forth, that if you don't do well, or if the child does not do well, there are things that they lose. They might lose graduation. They might lose out on scholarships. They might lose out on opportunities to be in a gifted and talented or in an Odyssey of the Mind. They might miss out on taking band or PE. Instead, they have to go to a developmental reading class. So when there are high stakes attached, this bell curve will always be used, and they will shift it back and forth. So remember that according to our normalized bell curve, it's fine mathematically for us to shift this. We're able to do that because the goal of this bell curve is to always have most kids here. 68% of the kids are going to fall in this giant hump right here. So if the kids don't, when we give the test, if the kids don't fall in that little hump here, we move it. So if the kids were taking a test and they all do really well, so you've got all these kids and they're doing well. You've got all these kids and they're over here. So your school did really great. All the kids did good. If that were to happen, it would not fit in the normalized curve. But what we do in the normalized curve is we shift it. Because remember, the goal of this kind of assessment is that most of the kids are in the hump. So then we would just take those kids and move the curve so that they're in the hump. So that means that your kids a minute ago were doing really well. They were +1 standard deviation ahead of the norm. They were doing great. But because so many of them were doing great, and the goal is that they meet in the middle, 68% of kids will fall in the middle, we have to move it because we can't have all kids do good. And that's often what teachers don't recognize. It's what principals keep quiet, is that even if everybody does well, which it sounds like everybody can, even if everybody does well, they will move the curve so that everybody does average. Because the goal of this is to have 68% of the kids be average. Are there any questions about that? How that works? Or why it works? Sometimes I've had students be like, what?
I mean, I understand everything that you're saying. Like, I understand that we move the hump over if everyone's doing great. Like, I get that. But why? Like, why move it? Like, what is the, like, oh no, well, you said the goal is to have everyone there, but if everyone's doing great, why not just leave it at everyone's doing great? Like, why do you have to move it to where everyone is like now doing normal? You know what I mean?
Absolutely. It's there's the rub, right? There's the rub. This kind of test is made to show what's typical. And so we're actually never going to have it where all the kids can pass if we continue to have it that we change the test all the time. And that when we change the test all the time, because in Texas we get a new test all the time, and we're always trying to see what's typical on that test, this is going to tell us what's typical. So what you're talking about is the other kind of a formalized assessment, which is a criterion referenced assessment. So a criterion reference assessment, and I don't have a slide in here, not in this one. I'll come back. So a criterion referenced assessment is the second type of formal assessment. So one, you have a bell curve, looking for what's typical or normal for those kids taking it at that time. The second type is a criterion referenced formal assessment. A criterion referenced formal assessment is what you actually perceive that a STAR test is. That's what they make it sound like, is that here's the criteria. We're going to set it right here at 80%. And when we set it here at 80%, we'll let all the kids who make above 80% just keep, it doesn't matter how many. The criteria never changes. It stays the same, and then the kids are either above it or below it. Okay, so the criteria is there, and the kids are either above it and below it. With this sort of assessment, it can be a score, like 80%. It could be something that we want the kids to be able to do. So the line could be that they are able to dribble the ball 18 times without it running away. The criterion says 18 times. The kids are either above it or below it. Okay, body mass index, you're either above, you're either above it or below it. Although most of us, I think, are above it. But we set the criteria, and then we see who's above or below it. And we never change the criteria. This in our heads is often what it feels that STAR test is. Like, here's the criteria, 80%, and the kids are either above it or below it. But it isn't like that. It is not a criterion referenced exam because we do this all the time. We change it. So it makes it sound like, well, we're still wanting 80%, but that 80% will never sit where most kids are because of this. If we're always looking for what's typical And we're changing what's typical because we're shifting it. Anytime we're changing it, you now have some sort of bell curve. Okay, so you've got two types of assessment. A criterion referenced, where we set the criteria and it's either above or below it. And then you've got a norm referenced or normal referenced, which is your bell curve. Okay. Your state exams where you're looking for certification, the reason that they hold off on giving you scores is because they do this very thing. That's why you can miss it by 1 or 2 questions. Because what they do is you take the test, makes it sound like, okay, if I take the test, I need an 80. And when I take that 80, hold on, I'm learning how to do this. Okay. So when I take that test and I make the 80 in the separate areas, if everybody else who's taking that test or has taken that test during the time I'm taking it scores really, really well, so they all score over here, you score over here and you're over here and all your friends are over here, they wait to give you the scores to see how everybody did, right? How did everybody taking the certification test for social studies or the certification test for ELAR, how did they do? Once they've gathered everybody who's taking it during that particular window of time, December to December or whatever it is, they gather what it is and then they create the bell curve so that what percentage goes in the middle? 68%. So 68% of you are going to score right here every time. So some of you are going to score great. Like this person over here is still okay, right? This person's still all right. But if you were here a minute ago, you were doing really well. Now you're just doing average. So anytime that you know that they're changing the test, they're shifting what it is that they're waiting to give you test scores, they're probably looking for what's typical. And they're going to give you the typical score.
But that doesn't change your grade, right? That it's just you're just average now.
Yeah.
But that doesn't change the fact whether you passed or you didn't pass.
Right. Your hope is that when you look at the 68%, most test people, when they do it, consider this 68% as passing. Certainly this side of it. Some will draw the line right here at the mean, right? So once they've done this, they'll say, okay, any student who's here, this red part right here, any student who's here has passed. Any student who's over here now is below. Now remember, a minute ago, all these students were doing pretty well. Now these guys are probably the ones who missed it by 1 or 2 questions. So if you've taken a practice test and you missed it by 1 or 2 questions, you were over here. That's all it was. You were just a little bit below what the mean was. So it doesn't affect your grade per se unless you fall on the bad side of it. If you fall on the side that's just below where everybody was doing, you're considered at risk. So a kid will often miss their passing of the STAR test by a couple questions, and that couple questions is right here. That's where they are. And so when we do intervention and we go in and we say, okay, this kid needs work on summarization or this kid needs work on main idea, we're going in and saying, can we take this kid, sometimes called a bubble kid, I hate that term, we're going to look at some test scores later on, and can I move them up? Because remember, this kid right here, and this kid right here, and this kid right here, they only need a couple questions to move into this area. So that's why we spend so much time on them, because this group right here, some of them are so close. And this is the one that hurts the most, because if you've only missed it by a couple questions, it's painful. Makes you feel like you're not quite enough, and you thought in the class you were doing okay. Most of your exams in college are not normalized, meaning that when you take the exam for me, I don't go in and say, okay, well, I want 68% of you to score a 70. I don't do that. I do make sure that I'm looking at individual questions and seeing how everybody did on individual questions. So if I have question 10 that out of my 80 of you, 65 missed it. I'm like, okay, I need to look at that. Some of my teaching or their reading didn't get that at all. What did I choose as an answer? What are they choosing as an answer? And then I can do some analysis and decide if the question is valid. In the STAR test, they give what do they call them? It's not fake questions. I'm trying to think of the term. I don't know. They're like practice questions that aren't going to be counted against the kid, but they are on the test, and they give them as practice questions to see how the kids, if the kids took it, how the kids would do. That way, if the test question is bad, they don't use it the following year. If the test question is good, they might. So that means the kid might take a test that has 60 questions on it, but they're actually only being tested on 50. So 50 would be the total number. So anytime that you have tests that change, anytime that you have some sort of an idea of what's typical or normal, this is what's happening. A high stakes assessment shifts it. Let me say it again. A high stakes assessment shifts it. So when you're angry about how things are being done in school, what you should be angry about is the high stakes part. Mathematically, we can take a look at what's in the middle and not be upset about it because it's what's typical. Okay, so here's what's typical for third grade. But when we start using it to keep third graders from going on to fourth grade or to put them into special needs classes and to make sure that they're being taken out of their specials like arts and science, arts and PE in order to go into a developmental reading, or they're getting intervention constantly and being pulled out of your class, then you should say, wait, one test shouldn't do that. Imagine if when you came into college, I looked at each of your names and I was like, oh, Brittany, okay, so you scored an 800, you go over here. And Vanessa, well, you scored a 900, you go over here. Oh, and Jenny, wow, you scored 50. Go in the corner. You'll have some friends in a little bit. And that every test score you had followed you and then disallowed you from doing particular things. It probably at some point in your career, you've had this happen. You've had it happen where you didn't get a scholarship, or the test was so racially biased that you didn't even understand some of the questions. I've had kids who ask me questions during a test that break your heart. I had one year during this was during the tax test, so it was the one right before STAR, would have been early 2000s, and I had a kid, I'll never forget it. He raised his hand and asked me, he says, what's a divan? In the wording of the question, it had how many people can fit on the divan. And he was confused because what he was reading it as was the van. So how many people can fit in the van? But the question asked on the van to him. But the word divan was actually a couch. And it had a picture of a kid sitting on a couch. So he was completely confused because the van sounded like the van, but it actually meant couch. And he was like, you can put a lot of people on top of the on top of the van. Like there could be 100 people all squished inside and on top of it. I don't know how to know. And you know what I had to say to that kid? Do the best that you can. Little pat on the back. And that's a cultural difference. We don't use that word down here in the South. So if you're sitting there going, I don't even know what a divan is, then you should be like, yeah, because we live in the South and we don't use it that way. Just like we don't say pop. We don't say, can I have a pop? And if you say it, the kids, or you might even think pop rocks. Like my kids will think pop rocks. I'm like, not pop rocks, pop, soda. And we'll use Coke for everything. You want a Coke? You'll say, yeah, I'll have a Dr. Pepper. We speak differently, and those are just simplistic ideas. More cultural ideas cause big problems when we're thinking about shifting this test. Claudia asks if this type of scoring will ever change. There are a couple states that have changed the shifting. Because we're one of the biggest states, Florida, California, and Texas, we have the largest number of people in our current school system. We're slow to change. We're Texans. We speak slow, we act slow, we move slow. With that, I don't know. I don't know because our legislature has this idea that tests tell us everything we need to know. And for me, I just think a test is one thing that it shows you about me. And it's one thing at one time. So I don't think it's very fair to shift it constantly. But I can tell you that it's not mathematically wrong to do that. In our statistics, if you were taking a pure statistics class and not looking at people, and we weren't worried about, mindsets and self-esteem and efficacy and all of these things, mathematically, if we're looking for the mean, we take the numbers and we make the mean, right? No problem, because it's math. When we start thinking about children, it's a whole different story. I will say I do not know, for the first time as a science teacher of reading, a science-based teacher of reading, I don't know what they're going to do with the STAR test now, because we didn't take it this year because of COVID. Now kids are losing a lot. I mean, we've got, most of our districts have approximately 50% of kids who have never showed up for the end of school, just disappeared. They were unable to get online. Their parents, there's tons of reasons why. Cultural reasons, personal reasons, but they weren't online. So they lost out on 4 months of school. Now they're getting another 2 to 3 month reprieve in the summer, so losing again. So you have a kid who's missed approximately half a year of education. Not because of anything they've done or anything they deserve, but they've missed half a year. And that's if we come back in the fall. They don't even know what that's going to look like yet. And I would argue probably it's going to be some sort of hybrid situation. It's going to have to be. But how they're going to do it, I don't know. I don't even know what to tell you. I don't know how they're going to give this assessment. We spend billions on it. Remember this guy? We spend billions on it. I can't imagine that they're just going to get rid of it. Nobody says don't test the kids. So something's going to happen. I can tell you this, and you probably will know this as well. So when you look at this, if you look at this chart now, we're moving up, right? We've been doing a better job at understanding what the STAR test is. Remember, we're getting tons of training. We're learning how to do all these things in our classroom. We've got tons of worksheets. Pearson's making badass money. We're going up. So now with COVID, what do you think is going to happen to these scores? You can type in your chat box. What do you think is going to happen to these scores? When they come back next year and in February, they take these tests. Yep. Michelle's got it down, drop. Alex has got it. Yes. Rosie, thank you. Yes. It's just going to drop. And when it does, people are going to say things about teachers that are totally untrue. They're going to say, well, teachers weren't able to teach online. Teachers weren't working hard online to know what to do. Kids aren't learning. Kids can't participate globally. The United States is failing our children. But really, it's that the test is failing our children. Teachers are working their butts off to try to figure out how to teach online. I have seen some amazing things happening. The problem is our kids don't have access the way they need to. The end. They just don't have access the way they need to. And kids, just like babies, babies when they're born, they get put on your chest or put into your arms, and that warmth of your arms and that warmth of your chest is such an important bonding piece. Kids need that. That relationship building is a really important thing. It's the part that with online education is missing. It's missing for you guys. I don't really know most of you. A couple of you I've spoken to on, Messenger, or through Blackboard messages. I write a little note and I'm like, oh, wow, she's got a new puppy too, or that's great. But to be able to know you and see you 3D and start to know what you're interested in is a lot harder online. And I'll tell you, the teachers who I've seen work way harder online, and a ton of hours too. Jessica has it right. She says, it's just not fair. My daughter's teachers worked so much harder. And you will too. Now, I can tell you the cool thing that's happening for you in working through all these online classes with me and with your other professors is that you are learning what works and doesn't work online, so that when you come out to do your student teaching or to work on some sort of field-based assignment with kids, you will have some knowledge about how to use the online platforms to meet with the kids. Okay, so just like you, the kids are adjusting, but I can tell you this is just about to drop again. We're probably going to do some sort of change to this, but your scores are about to drop. And it's going to come out that teachers aren't doing their job, and it's a lie, just an outright lie. Our reading scores look very average compared to what they've always looked like. They're not amazing. We do have work to do with our kids in reading, and you guys know, hopefully, reading is where it's at. You being able to interview for a job and talk about the things that we're talking in here about the writer's workshop, when you're talking about literacy, you're talking about test scores and interventions and RTI, which we're going to get into next week. When you're using those words, you are hireable because that's what they're looking for out in the school. When you get out in the school and you're in your own classroom and you're doing those things, awesome. But it also keeps people off your back so that you can do great teaching. Because once you're using that language, they believe you. Okay, so let's keep moving forward. So here are some of the assessments that are talked about inside of your book. I'm going to move this over a little bit. All right, so these are all formal assessments. If it says that they're formal, that means most likely they're using a bell curve. Now, it doesn't mean that they're always shifting the bell curve. When you're giving a good quality test, the test doesn't shift. Here's what third grade is. Let's see how close to third grade this kid who is in third grade is. So when you look at norm reference, we're definitely using a bell curve here. So things like achievement tests, Metropolitan we don't really use here in Texas so much. The CTB test you'll see often with kids who are going into a special education scenario where you're needing to have data to see where the kid is in terms of his mental capacity as well as what he's doing in class. The Gates-McGinty is one that's used all the time. This is another type of reading exam, very similar to the IRI that we're doing, Nelson-Denning as well. So all of these are just examples of norm reference. So if you see norm, you should think typical. That's going to be your bell curve. What's typical? Criterion reference, I started to describe to you, which is where we set the criteria and then we see if the kid was above or below whatever our goals were. So we could have a criteria that says they will master 2 out of 3 main idea questions, and then we see if the kid is above it or below it. But the criteria doesn't change. You'll see here you could give a list of primer level basal words. These could be high frequency words or Dolce-Yop words, where they are words based on spelling patterns. And then you can say the student will identify 25 of the 30 words correct. So if they're doing that, they're setting their criteria as 25 words, and we're giving 30 words. The kid's either above it at 26 words or below it at 24 words. So in the middle here, as you read through these, think about what you will do in this class. Every single module has different standards that we're trying to meet to make sure you are ready to pass that test. Because while I'm not teaching to the test, I am making sure that you are learning things that will impress the test. You might not know that it's happening, but it's happening. I know it's happening because I've had students that come back and tell me it's happening. So those instructional objectives inform my teaching. Therefore, I can set the criteria for you and say this student is either above it, she wrote a lot, she discussed with her peers, she texted her peers and took a picture of it to show me. So she's either above it or she's below it. And of course, my goal is at the end that you're all above it. I would absolutely love to give all A's. Boy, that would just be awesome. Okay, so, and then the last one are diagnostic tests. Diagnostic tests are those tests that diagnose something. So think about it as if you were going into the doctor and they're trying to figure out what you have. That's what these do in reading as well. So each one of these are different kinds of diagnostic assessments for reading to figure out, do they have dyslexia? Do they have some sort of other health impairment? Where are they with this impairment? What sort of areas? We do it a lot with hearing impaired, where we'll provide sounds to the kid to see where on their phonemic understanding, their phonemic recognition they are. Sometimes kids can hear the real high letter sounds, A, but they can't hear the lower, more tonal sounds, B. So they might not hear the middle, but they can hear the high or the low. So you've got all of this sort of scaling about where kids can hear. So all of these look at that sort of scale. the Woodcock Reading Mastery Test is often used in SAISD for exactly that. We use the Woodcock to add to achievement tests to see how the kid is doing and if dyslexia or dysgraphia is readily shown. By the way, dyslexia, which we're going to talk about on the last day, dyslexia is often comorbid, meaning it comes with other disabilities. So dyslexia, if you've been tested and you have dyslexia or suspect that you do, there's a really high correlation with ADHD, and there's a really high correlation with dysgraphia, meaning that if you struggle with reading the phonological system, so dyslexia, then you probably are going to struggle with the letter sounds on paper, which is dysgraphia. So they're comorbid. Dyslexia comes with a couple other things quite often. Any questions? I lost my chat room. Okay. Okay. So what I really need you to get as we kind of move to this kind of last part of assessment is that a high stakes assessment is the one that has big consequences attached. Not all assessment is bad. Diagnostic assessment helps us to know what's going on for the kid and can provide 504 or other health impairments, ways for us to handle the disability so that it's not impacting their school as much. A criterion reference assessment helps to see, well, how are they doing compared to everybody else and compared to what the line of achievement is, what the goal is. And even the normalized assessment, okay, the norm referenced assessment, that's telling how is the kid compared to everybody else. The only problem is when we shift it. Okay. Now, at the last class, we kind of watched a news piece about some teachers who engaged in some changing of answer keys for kids so that the kids would do better, and districts that sort of promoted that in a way and why it's so problematic. But hopefully you also understand why a teacher would do it. Because ethically and morally, we find ourselves worried about our kids. We're worried about Jenny, and we're worried about Beverly, and we're worried about Erica because we know them. And we know how hard they've been working, and we don't believe that one test score tells everything about the kid, but when it's a high-stakes test, it's probably going to hurt if they don't do well. All right, the other thing that's happening due to these tests is this. Have y'all seen Eddie B before? If you haven't, he's one you might want to Google when you're having a bad day. He's really funny. Here he comes.
Hey folks, I'm Joe.
Oh Lord, we get to learn.
In my campaign, as I've said time and again, we're in a battle for the soul of this nation. That means not only defeating Donald Trump, but also taking big, bold actions to help Americans who are struggling.
I can't. My
it's not going to be
arrow
easy.
is gone.
But nothing worth fighting for is ever easy. So join. Together, we'll defeat Donald Trump and transform America.
This is going to be a problem. No.
It's hustling time of year. Everybody hustling to learn what they thought they learned. Y'all don't remember nothing? We got a testing coordinator. They ain't coordinate. Why we cramming so hard doing testing time anyway? You ain't handle your business last semester. Now you got me teaching reading and math. I'm a science teacher. I don't know nothing about the little Pythagorean thing. I can't teach no reading. Well, that's a sentence splice. Is this a run-on sentence? Subject or predicate? Subject is y'all getting on my nerve, and I'm the predicate. I don't even know if that's right. You better leave me alone. You're walking up the wrong data wall. If I hear one more word about on the bubble kid, I'm going to jump up.
Have y'all seen data walls? So he says, I don't know what to do with all these data walls. If you haven't, you can Google it, take a look at some data walls. They'll show you pictures, look for images. Data walls are often put up in class and in the literacy labs or something like this. Teachers spend hours working on disaggregating data based on the test score to find out what particular area the kid needs help on. And then we try to go in, but they take, it's highlighting and color coding and mass amounts of time that could be actually working on things that matter. So that's what he's talking about here.
air, and when I land, whoever I see, I'm a scissor kick. All these challenges. Do the use your strategy challenge. I just gave you the pretest, son. How you finished already? Check over your work. Well, check over your work again. Take a nap, Tony. Just take a nap. I'm not finna do that with you. You just ain't gonna bubble in nothing. Bubbling in is beneath you. Brown, what we doing today? Testing. Mr. Brown, what we doing tomorrow? Testing. Testing, 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 testing.
I do not know how to get out of this. Sorry, guys. My cursor is just disappeared.
Beginning of the school year, gotta start at the beginning of the Bible. Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, God.
Sorry, guys. Hold on. Shake your head if you can hear me. You can hear me, Beverly? Okay. I am stuck in a way. So we're just going to move forward. All right. So some of the negative aspects of testing, and if you have kiddos, you definitely have felt some of this, that kids feel like they're not good enough. So we've got aspects of testing that hurt teachers and institutions of learning, and we also have testing and how it impacts kids. So first of all, you've got this structural limitation, meaning that when we're giving a test to 1 million kids, we can't have questions that ask kids to be deep and complex. We can't actually look at the process. So what you're going to see is like multiple choice. Say it again. Multiple choice. Multiple choice can only look at anything so deeply. I mean, it just is multiple choice. So we're not going to be able to look at how the kid came to the answer, what's actually going on inside the kid's head. So the structural limitation is everybody gets exactly the same test at the same time on the same day, and it's given exactly the same way, and that those are always done multiple choice, always. The misinterpretation and misuse of test results includes the shifting of the bell curve, but it also includes things like we're now going to use that test to decide the class that the kid goes in. So they're going to be in an AP class, or they're going to be in an honors class, or they're going to be in the slow kids class. You can't use one test or a high stakes test specifically to ever put a kid into a particular area. You should always be using some form of portfolio. Now, you can use this as one part, but it can't be the only thing. The percentage of students passing the state standardized exam, for us, that's the STAR, has become the defining measure for whether or not schools are successful. This is even impacting our MLS, so buying a house. If a school is not seen as successful, the house is not worth as much. The higher the income bracket for the house, the better the schools usually are. And that has to do with taxes, guys. When you have a house that's worth, or the average house is worth $1 million, those school taxes are much bigger than when you go to a house where the average house is $60,000. And when you're looking for a house and you're on the area, if it says that the school is not doing very well or is IR, in need of intervention, then you think twice about, is this a good place for me to raise my kids? Is this a good area? When really every school has amazing teachers, right? There's always some that are just a mess, and then there's some that are really amazing. The teacher is what defines. A one-size-fits-all approach to motivation and academics. That means we're going to do these particular motivating things for an exam. It might be a star pep rally, yay, and pencils, and a pizza party, and all of these things that are supposed to make kids more interested and engaged, and yet it doesn't mostly work, guys. First of all, because it's an extrinsic motivator, meaning that if you take that motivator away that day, then they're no longer motivated to do it. You can't always give candy, right? But it's also that for those kids who might have some anxiety surrounding a test, going to a pep rally does not lower that anxiety. It does not make them do better. Wearing t-shirts that say Star Wars or, things like that does not make the kid do better. And it doesn't make the teacher feel better anyway. That teacher knows which kids are going to struggle. They can tell you. They don't need the test score to tell you. Teacher job satisfaction. And of course, stay power. Stay power means how long the teachers are going to stay at that job at that school. So if I take an area like Harlandale and I look at the average number of years that a teacher stays at a school, it's approximately 3 years. If I look at Alamo Heights and I see how long a teacher stays at a job, it's an average of 10 years. The longer that a teacher's at a school, the more they know the community, the better teacher they are for that group, not including all the money. So the higher the income of the kids, so their parents, the higher the SES, the more likely it is that the teacher's going to stay there longer. If you're somebody who wants to get a job in Bernie or Floresville or one of those smaller areas that you might live in, the teachers will stay there an awful long time. When scores are low, often teacher job satisfaction also drops. Why might it drop? Why are teachers not as happy often if they are in schools where testing is promoted as the main way of teaching? Teach to the test. Why do teachers say they're not so happy? Yep. The administration definitely comes down on staff, makes you feel like you're not doing enough. I've seen Saturday schools, things like that, where we bring the kids in on Saturday. When you feel like you're not doing enough, but you're giving everything you have, it feels awful. And it feels awful to constantly be teaching to the test when you don't actually believe in the test. And now you know that the test is not the best way to teach because it shifts. It limits their, I think Cindy just said, it limits their teaching. It says, hey, we're going to funnel it down into just teaching to the test, giving a prompt, making them do writing. We have a prompt, make them do writing. Every Friday they turn in the writing. They do worksheets on main idea. We test to see if they have it. We're not doing guided reading. We're doing these worksheets. We're doing AR, and that's how they're reading. That's the only time they're reading. Accelerated readers on the computer. We are never giving the kids a chance to silent read and to work on their reading. And if we don't do that, how do we expect them to read, guys? If we don't give them any time in class to read, when are they supposed to read? Like, when do they read this book that they checked out from the library? Most aren't reading them at home. They have lots of things to do, but they're not choosing that. Spends a lot of time on the testing instead of learning. We're interested in what the score is instead of the process of the score. When we say that it limits the curriculum or narrows the curriculum, that's another one. You no longer are teaching about the rainforest and about space and doing really wonderful thematic units. Instead, you're being narrowed into these very particular main idea and summarization ideas, right? Just what the test says is important. The last one is a really important one. The last one is what I was saying about housing, that when I look at zip codes, and you tell me how much the houses are worth in those areas, so I can then use a zip code to predict how the kids are going to do. So as a reading scientist, I can look at a zip code, and I can say, okay, well, in 78201, kind of a northwest side, 78201, and the average house is worth $100,000, I can say, oh, well, they're going to score somewhere in that 72%. And I can be right by about 2 percentage points, just by zip code. What you should be going is, no, wait, what about good teachers? What about kids? What about all the programs and the process? On a high stakes test, on a formalized assessment that's made by the outside, meaning you didn't make it, somebody else made it, I can predict it based on your income and your zip code, which is your income. Now, that's not saying that some kids aren't going to do well and some kids are going to do poorly, because remember, it's bell curve, right? So everything that you do, you might as well do good stuff, guys. Teaching to the test is not going to get you what you want, because pretty much on that high stakes test, I can predict it without even paying attention to what you've done. You might as well do the great stuff that your college is teaching you to do. You might as well sit next to that teacher and go, I just don't think we should only use the test. Like, these worksheets don't seem to be making really amazing teachers. Out of me, I feel really bored. You'll hate your job if that's all you're doing is worksheets. You'll hate it. And it's why teachers leave. It's hard and boring to do things that you don't believe in. I think teaching is the best thing in the world. I miss it wholeheartedly. I always say I'm going back, and I will go back, because it is wonderful to always get a new chance to do something every day and to shape kids like that. When we stop paying attention to why we became a teacher, why we're doing this, you're going to end up with a big problem, and something that you're not having such a good time with. So how did we get here? There's a video you can go into and take a look at standardized testing. And just so that you know, there's a couple cuss words. So if you got little kids running around, you might want to like listen to it on your headphones. And what I want you to do as you're watching that little video that's in here, it's pretty short, and of course it's John Oliver, so he's funny. What I want you to think about is, are there other options for measuring student growth? Like, how in your classroom would you want to measure student growth if you weren't just using a test? I still use assessment in my classroom, whether it's simple assessment, like, all right, guys, tell me your favorite kind of dog, since we've discussed what a dog is, and you're in kindergarten, so now you know what a dog is. If you have a favorite kind of dog, raise your hand. And we see who can raise their hand and who's still not sure about their favorite kind of dog. That's a simple assessment. I can ask a question, like a mathematics question, 7 times 6. We see who raises their hand. That's the simplest kind of assessment. I can ask more detailed assessments, like writing a paper, being able to sit next to me and discuss what they know about frogs. You know how hard it is to sit next to somebody and just discuss something you've learned? It's the highest form of learning, is teaching or sharing with another person. So think about some other options for measuring student growth other than a test. A spelling test. Think of something else. What would you do? And just so that you know, districts do have options for measuring student growth. They just place too much emphasis on the high stakes one, our STAR test. They can use things like portfolios, student SLOs, or student learning objectives. So you'll often see it in a classroom where a teacher writes on the board what their goal is for the day or for the week. They can use district-wide or district-level pre- and post tests. Sometimes these are kind of marked as benchmarks. Benchmarks are used way too much, especially in SAIC. They do them all the time. And when they do them, it'll take out 4 days of teaching, because they'll have to do a math one, an ELAR one, a social studies one, and it'll take like 3 or 4 days of teaching time. And they'll do that 3 or 4 times before the test. The hours and the days that are missed by teaching is just awful. Value-added measures, this is more for teachers, is what we do is, instead of looking for what you didn't do, we look for what you are doing, right? So when somebody comes in to do your assessment, each year they come in, each semester they come in and they take a look at you. Instead of saying, oh, well, Jenny didn't do this and Erica didn't do this, instead they look at what I am doing and then provide goals for what would come next. So value added, meaning we look for the value that you're adding to the classroom. So instead of looking at the bad things, we look at what you can do. And then lastly, their student growth information sheet. There is one up in Blackboard. And basically what the growth information sheet is it takes all of the different tests and benchmarks and other things that the teacher has done to create a portfolio for a kiddo. And we'll look at that in just a second. All right. So formal assessments are systematic, meaning that we do them all the same way. They are an attempt to see how well the students have learned something that they're being told to learn, and that they also say if a kid is proficient at doing it. So have they learned it, and are they proficient at doing it? This allows us to compare it against other kids or other standards. I can either compare it to whatever the standard is in a criterion reference. So a formal assessment can be criterion reference. So I can say, okay, well, the goal of the criteria was 80%, and I can compare your kid to being above it or below it. Are they proficient or mastered it, or are they below it? They need intervention. But it'll also allow me to say, okay, well, what's normal for this third grader? What's normal for the third grader is comparing it to all the other third graders who took it, and then putting that 68%, 34, and 34 together and saying, okay, this is what's typical. We can do that with our standardized tests. We can do that with criterion reference tests, norm reference tests, achievement tests, and aptitude tests. Aptitude tests are your IQ tests. Okay, they see sort of where you are in comparison with all other people on what they think are more abstract or complex ideas. If any of you are taking any of the gifted and talented training, they definitely look for depth and complexity. Aptitude tests attempt to do that. They're often more pictorial, so they ask things like, you'll see a truck on a hill, and this truck is supposed to hold a bunch of milk. So it's a round truck that holds milk. And what they want to know is what the milk looks like inside of the truck when it's on a hill. And then the kid has to say, okay, well, if it's on the hill, the milk is going to be facing down this way or up or, so they have a lot more depth and complexity. Your aptitude tests initially were thought of as the SAT. We did think of them as a achievement test, but ultimately it was an aptitude test. What we know now is your SAT has no bearing on how you do as a freshman in college. Even though for you, if you didn't do well on your SAT, you missed out on a lot of scholarships, you missed out on some colleges to go to, and all of that. So I have got to figure out, there it's back, look, oh, so happy. All right, so I'm moving out of the PowerPoint now, my YouTube's moved on. I'm moving out of the PowerPoint now to bring you into your Blackboard. Okay, so if you're not in Blackboard now, you can either watch me or you can go into your own Blackboard. And like I said, the class we're going to be ending in about, 10 minutes or 15 minutes. But I want to show you to kind of go over again what your attempt to doing what you are attempting to doing every week. Okay. All right. So we're now technically in Module 2. And you're always going to have your standards. This is what we're attempting to make sure that you are able to do for when you go into your high stakes test. Because even if I don't agree with them, you're going to have to do them. The question is, can you participate well enough that when you feel that you're taking these tests, that you are learning things that you can use? All right, so weekly readings, we're in here. You've got your chapters to read. Now, remember, Writer's Workshop, if you want to read less or more, that's fine. It's on you. Just make sure you're done by the end of the class. So when you're tubing, bring the book. All right. And then this is another article. This is Louisa Moats on spelling. So if you're somebody who's working in those early grades, in particular, pre-K to 2, or you're going to be working with kids who struggle with phonological awareness, phonics, the attachment of letters and sounds, or phonemic awareness, the auditory part of sound, this is definitely an article that you want to spend some time in. In some ways, I would say for you to read this article closely and to do sort of skim reading through some of these, especially chapter 10. It's long. Then for next week, as you get ready, you're going to be looking at RTI. We're going to be writing several RTI statements over the course of this summer session, and this will give you the first time to attempt it. Okay? All right, so read through those. You're like, okay, now I've read. What do I do next? Now I'm going to take a look at the videos and PowerPoints. All right, here's where the live classes. You're in there now. The PowerPoint, same one as from Module 1. Here's about RTI, so you can be ready for it. And here is the motivation survey that I was telling you about. And here's what the motivation inventory actually looks like. All right, so we're going to click in here. Remember last week I showed you, I'm going to open this up. I talked to you about how affect impacts testing and impacts your classroom. When kids don't want to do something, it's a lot harder to get them to do it. When they feel bad about themselves, when they have a bad attitude towards school or towards reading and literacy, they end up not wanting to do it. When they don't want to do it, they fall farther and farther behind. The gap gets bigger between those kids who are doing it and wanting to do it, and those kids who are fighting against it. So our first goal as a teacher is to find a way to make sure that the attitude and motivation for the kids in my class is high. One of the primary ways to do this, just as a simple, quick aside, is to find something that they like to read. When they find a genre they like, you promote the reading. Some things you like. You don't want to read 85 copies of Diary of a Wimpy Kid, but they love the Diary of a Wimpy Kid. And there's a whole bunch in the series now. So you've got to find what it is that they like and be willing to teach summary to kids in all these different texts, not just one text. All right, so here's the survey. If you want to read some about how it comes to be, the reliability and generalizability of it, you can read up here because this is a quantitative piece, meaning that we are using numbers to assign how the kid is motivated or unmotivated to read in 2 areas, recreational and academic reading. It'll tell you how they develop the scale. It's been done with thousands of kids. And it tells you even how to use the survey. I think my video will be a little bit more simplistic for you and how to do it, but we're going to kind of take a look at it. All right. So each one of these looks like this, these Garfields. Remember, you got Happy Garfield. He's worth 4 points. So if they love reading a book on a rainy Saturday, or if they're like, well, it's all right. He's not sad. It's fine. This guy's like, I really didn't want to, and my mom is making me read 20 minutes. And this one actually throws a fit when you try to put him in the room to read. So the kid will answer each one of these. Okay, there's 20 different questions. I think I showed you. Have I shown you all of this? I don't actually remember. Okay, so there's 20 questions. They move between recreational reading, so reading a book on a Saturday, to academic reading, things like using a dictionary or taking a reading test. You will actually have kids who are like, I love taking tests. That's awesome. Some of you are like, I hate taking tests. I'm not good at it. You've decided yourself. Okay, so here's how it's scored. There's your recreational reading was question 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you're going to give points, or you won't be. You'll be seeing that points have been given for how the kid engaged in it, right? So did the kid love it, kind of like it, not really like it, and hate it? And you're going to put 4, 3, 2, 1, 4, 4 all the way down. Now, I want you to realize that on this side, the numbers are wrong. This should say 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, right? So that gives you 1 to 10 and 11 to 20. A raw score is a term that we use to describe the actual counting up of the score. That's all it is. All you got to do is add all these guys together, and that's your raw score. The full scale raw score means if there were subtests, like in this one, we have 2 tests, meaning that these are subtests, okay, of the main part. So a full scale means we take all of the raw scores and we add them together. For this one, it's just these 2 because those are the 2 full scales that we have. So we would add this raw score and this raw score, and that's what goes here. Okay, so once we've done that, now it's asking us for percentile ranks. This is not a number you come up with. Because this is a norm reference test, we're going to see what the norm is for the particular grade that the kid is in. So let's start as the normal or typical for a kid who's in 3rd grade. How would this kid who took this test at this time rank compared to other 3rd graders or other 4th graders? So if this is Jenny's test, we've got our raw scores, we put them down here, and we're like, okay, raw scores. Then I can go up and I can compare how Jenny's doing as a 4th grader to other 4th graders. I can do this with any of them. Well, it's actually down here. All right, so here's what it looks like. Really quickly, how you read it is you have, remember, Jenny's grade 4, but you've got grade 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if the kid is in 4th grade, you're going to be looking at the 4th grade ones. Over here, you see that it's called raw score. So what you're looking for is what the raw score was for each of the areas. So you're like, okay, well, Jenny is a grade 4, and we're first going to look at the recreational. Okay, well, we got nothing down in here. We'll say that maybe she was at a 32. So we're going in here and we're looking down, and we're going to keep coming because our raw score was a 32. So when we go across, we come over to where it says recreational, and we say, oh, she's in the 66th percentile. That means that approximately 44% of kids do better or like it more than she does. So it's a little bit better than the mean, but she's sort of that kid who's like, eh. She's definitely a kid that if you find the right genre for her, she'll go with you. Okay? So that's kind of the short end of how you do this. You're going to be, for your assignment, you're going to be given this part. What you're going to have to do is say, okay, how did this kid do? What did this kid circle on number 19? And then you're going to go down here and you're going to find number 19, which is now 9. And you're going to put what the kid made as a 4, and you'll be filling out this page. Okay, that's what your practice is going to be in terms of looking at motivation. Now, I also want to tell you that some of you for Module 1 did not go in and look at, in particular, the Mahali Csikszentmihalyi part. So I think it is. Yeah. So make sure you go back in here to kind of remind yourself about affect and motivation, reminding ourselves that our goal is flow, meaning that time moves quickly and that I've got the skill level, the difficulty of what I'm doing is being met with my ability to do it. If something is really hard, so the difficulty is really high, and my skill level is really low, I'm going to have a lot of anxiety around doing it because I don't know how to do it, and it just fills me with anxiety. You might be feeling that a little bit in this class, like, oh my God, this is really hard. I don't know how to get this all together, and right now my skill is kind of low at figuring this out. Therefore, it causes anxiety for you or overwhelm. If the difficulty is really high, but you have the skill, so after a couple weeks, you're going to get the skill to do this, then you're in flow. Like, it's going to move quickly. You're going to be on here, and a couple hours are going to pass, and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, I've been here a couple hours. This is great. I'm done. If you have a difficulty that's really low, meaning that it doesn't take anything for the kid to do it, you've seen kids that just fill out worksheets and don't care. It's really low. The difficulty is really low, and their skill is really low, well, then it's going to be a match. But if the difficulty is really low, so it's easy, but their skill level is really high, they've done 25 worksheets on summarization. So they know how to do these worksheets. They find themselves bored. They're bored in your class. Your kids at home find themselves bored. They're like, Mom, I'm bored. And you're like, they have books and video games and they've got all sorts of board games to play and puzzles, and they say, I'm bored. What that means is that the difficulty of what's going on in their household is really low. They don't have enough to do. And their skill, their ability to do stuff is really high. Like, they can wash the dishes or wipe down the windows or sweep the porch or play the puzzle. But they're finding it that their difficulty is really low and their skill at doing stuff is really high. So they walk around going, Mom, I'm bored. Or you find them just doing video games constantly. So take a look in here if you're kind of wondering about it. I discuss a little bit more about flow in here, but if you haven't looked at it, it's definitely going to help you as you start to answer Module 2 with the Garfield. Because remember, it's not just about the task. I want you to understand the process of figuring out the task. That motivation is actually one of our pillars that's not described by the National Reading Panel. So National Reading Panel 2001 are the people who came up with comprehension, vocabulary, phonemic awareness, phonics, and fluency. Those are 5 pillars. As a reading scientist, we say, hey, there's actually 2 more that really impact reading. That's motivation and writing. Reading and writing are recursive. They grow at the same time. Okay, so inside of your weekly videos, this video will pop up pretty soon. I'll have it in there so you can pay attention to it if you want to. Listen to me, hang out with me. I'm probably your favorite voice before you go to sleep. You just want to watch me all day long. And then after you've kind of worked through that, your weekly homework is in here. I have graded everything except for not the start of your affect piece. I haven't done those yet, but I will. And then just make sure that you're doing your filing.
Laura Morales has joined the meeting.
You email me or Blackboard me and be like, I did it wrong. Help me. I want to fix it. So that's great. There was one thing I was going to say about that. Hold on. I made notes. One thing. What was I going to say about that? The affect is being, yeah, I got that. Oh, if you get feedback later and you want to change your response before Friday, like you get some feedback from your group and you're like, oh man, I did it wrong, just post a new attempt under your original post. I'll read whichever one is the most current. So if you notice something in kind of going back that you want to fix, or somebody tells you, no, Dr. Wilson didn't say that, or I don't know, but I did it this way, and you feel like that's a better way to do it, just go in and add into your post. I'll read the most current one always. Okay, so I'll give you until next Friday to get that done. All right, so here's where the Garfield assessments are for your group post, and here's sort of what you're writing. So anytime that I call something a frame, what that means is you're going to use this scientific writing. You literally can copy and paste these things into a document and fill it out. When we're writing scientifically as reading specialists, reading teachers, we always are using the same form. We use the same form so that anybody who picks up this form can know exactly what it is that the test shows. This allows us to prove what we're doing in the classroom. Why we're working on
Laura
motivation.
Morales
Well, let me show
has
you
left
how
the
to
meeting.
share in motivation. And I'll tell you, if you're going to work in those upper grades, these are kids who have had 4 or 5 years sometimes of a lack of real motivating things to do in class. They've been taught to the test so much that all they end up doing is intervention. And nobody wants to sit in intervention constantly. Nobody. Are there any questions on, let me see if I can find my thing here. Let's see. There. Any questions on any of this part? I'll give you a second. If you're sending questions through Blackboard, I totally love it. That's absolutely great. If you don't get a response from someone in your group, first send it to your group, okay? Trust your group to be collegial. Trust your group to be working through the same stressful parts that you're in right now. Trust your group. But if you're not getting something from your group, then you can text me. Say, I tried my group, but nobody's answering, or they said this, but she's confused also. So if your group becomes confused on something, you can definitely contact me, okay? Your group is sort of like the ask 3 before me. Try to ask them, and then you can come definitely and ask me, especially if it's taking too long for them to answer you back. All right. The last thing on the homework required is to join in on Join SA Reads Facebook page. Some of you have done SA Reads probably when you took your 3314 class, your early literacy class. You might have had to do 10 hours, probably did, with SA Reads. You were using explicit systematic instruction, explicit teaching of reading, when you were using the Florida Center and those activities that you used there. Right now, SA Reads is on hold. They were not funded for this year to do face-to-face tutoring, right, because COVID. So what they've ended up moving into is a teaching of academies that are very scientific focused. But what I like about the Facebook page, now this is if you're on Facebook. If you're not on Facebook, then you can't join them, although I think they're on Instagram too. Join them on SA Reads. You'll actually probably even see me. I post on there quite a bit. But it'll give you some really good access to articles that are current, ways that you can engage in some sort of protesting if you're feeling like this isn't fair and teachers are being limited by these tests and we need to do something about this. Right now is the time to do it, guys. Right now is the time to do it. So if you don't have Facebook, you can take a look online at SA Reads and just see what's going on their website, because if we're going to push change, it's right now. There's so much change going on with Black Lives Matter, period. There's so much change going on with LGBTQ, which we just had a Supreme Court law rule decision come through that says that, hey, you cannot sexually discriminate against gender with transgender, and you can't do it against sexuality. That's a huge deal. It was a 6-3 vote. We've got changes going on in the middle with our Alliance for Teaching, meaning how are we going to teach and how do we get paid for all of this? Yeah, Michelle, don't send your kids to school on test days. The problem with that, and it is a way to protest for sure, they will just do retests with your kids. That's what I've seen happen most of the time. You literally have to write and say that you do not want your kid tested, and that you are going to stand firm against that and be willing to take your kid home. Yeah, the star is just a big old mess. So if you're looking for some way to protest or be active while not going to a protest, both for any of those areas that we've been talking about, you might take a look also at the San Antonio Alliance of Teachers, see what they're up to. They're actually protesting right now this idea that teachers need to go back to school and be around all of the kids. Yeah, so find a way to be active. That's pretty much what this last homework is. So if you don't have a Facebook page, because you don't do Facebook, find something that you are interested in terms of I'm bookmarking San Antonio Reads, or I'm liking them on Instagram, or I am finding a way to be involved. Then you can post that and prove it to me that you've done something to stand for an idea that has some high stakes attached to it, right? So if you are Black right now, if you're Black forever, if you're Black, what we see is that test scores are lower in those income areas. That's not fair, and it means it's not equitable. We've got structural issues going on with the ways that color provides inequity, whether you're any person of color. And so find a way to battle some of that. Yeah, Laura says they've got some good info. Yeah, they even have a conference that you can join up with a lot of times right now, and it's free. If you're doing any of that, let me know if you find something good. I'll make sure I post it for everybody, but mostly I might post it. Mariah asks, at the bottom of the Garfield homework, do we come up with the intervention, or is there an area where we can go that provides that information? All right, great question. Module 3 is about to open up for you on Wednesday, and inside of Module 3 are a whole bunch of interventions. Right now, what I would say to you to find the intervention for motivation, the best thing for you to do is just to kind of Google search and figure out what you would imagine would be a good intervention for motivation. Because remember, it's the +2, the 5 pillars +2. Those 2, motivation and writing, are going to be interventions that you really have to do some digging and looking for in order to find what's going to be motivating for the kid. And if you want to, by the way, if you're wanting to do these with a digital lens to them, like what would an intervention be for comprehension digitally? What would an intervention be for fluency using digital media? Then feel free to do that. I think it's a great thing to kind of dig into right now while you don't have any high stakes. Like, I'm in it for you to do well, and if you're not doing well, then I'm going to definitely let you know so that you can fix those things. All of these things are new to you. I know they're new to you, and I know there's a lot of them. I'm absolutely aware that I'm asking a lot of you, and I'm asking a lot of myself in reading all of these things, but I'm absolutely in for you guys doing well. When you are trying and I see things being submitted and the work that's inside of those documents is deep and complex, you're going to get good grades, but you're also going to get good comments from me. So when you're thinking of interventions for Mariah, who's asking, but I think probably some others are asking, yeah, just do some searches for this one. But as you get into Module 3, inside of Module 3, I can actually show you, inside of Module 3, there are some, whoops, hit the wrong thing. Inside of Module 3 on extensions, there are some intervention pages for you to go to. One of my favorites is Reading Rockets. Reading Rockets is a website, but inside of the website, tons of really great interventions. This is intervention for phonics, intervention for alphabetic principle, and right now you're just doing motivation. So I don't think there are any in Module 2. Let me go back. Let me take a look at your Module 2. I don't know if I put any in here. I might go in and add some for you. I'll tell you what I'll do, Mariah. I will make sure that I go in here and put a couple good websites. But for those of you that are on right now, start with Reading Rockets, but do some digging. What would be motivating for your kids in your home? What do you think would be motivating for yourself if you were a kid? Yeah. And as we end this little 1 hour, 1.5 hour piece, I would also say to you, when you're in this class, as you're sort of ending your reading coursework, most of you, unless you're coming back for a master's degree, which would be awesome, you might want to make a folder that has all of these websites that are the good ones. In general, teachers, we don't go back to all the books that we hold, All right, do you guys still see me? Okay, cool. So, when you're seeing me, you see these books behind me, and they actually are real books. They are my real kind of, I don't know, the joy of my life in a way. But the truth is, when we're teachers, most of the time we're not pulling out these books to look at each thing. We're Googling. We're Googling how to do something. We're Googling what we need to be doing. We're Googling an idea and then seeing if it fits with our kids. And our goal is to see, can I come up with a lens that makes sense for my kids? I have to take things and shape them. So that's what I'm going to ask you to do for the motivation piece. All right. So with that being said, I'm going to let you go. I wanted to say also that on Thursday, of course, I have office hours, and I was very lonely last week. I was very lonely. I sat for 2 hours trying to check email, and then I was messing around in your Blackboard, and I was grading a little of those of you that turned it in early, and I wanted friends, and nobody came on. None of you guys came on, and I was just me and the dog. So on Thursday, which is before everything's due, from about noon to 2, I have office hours, and I'll just be sitting here, hanging out in the heat, wanting a friend. So if you would come in as my colleague and ask some questions at that point, that'd be great. You'll probably get some really big, answers because I know the answers. I can help you. So if you have questions about it, like save them up, write them down in your notebook that you're keeping, and that way when you meet with me, you'll have some crossed off and you'll have some that you want to ask me. And so before you turn things in, I can give you at the moment feedback if your group's not getting it to you or you have additional ideas that you want to kind of put forward. All right, guys. So with that being said, let me pull up the chat. Oh, those of you, I don't know how many of you have not had access to the book. I've heard a couple of you. They're supposed to be sent out. If you don't have access to the book, please contact somebody. I don't even know if it's IT or if it's a woman named Ursula Vaughn, URS. Ursula Vaughn is one that does the ebooks. I mean, you might just literally contact her. I mean, directly email her and say, Dr. Wilson doesn't know what to do. Give me my book. I paid for it because it's supposed to be mailed to you. The book is supposed to come to you. You paid for that book. So I don't know if your address is wrong or whatever, but oh my gosh, somebody got it sent to Pennsylvania, or University of Pennsylvania. Yeah, check your addresses. That's awful. So see if you can get a hold of Ursula Vaughn and say what's going on, or contact IT. They might be able to help you. I wish I could help you better. I don't. But yes, they're supposed to mail the books to you. Like, I don't even have access in here to put them up for you. Like, I literally don't have access to put it up. It should have been sent to you on something called Red Shelf. Like, I don't know. I'm hoping that you guys get the book because you'll be so behind if you don't have it by next week. So if you don't have the book, definitely be looking online for everything and getting the Writer's Workshop book out of your hand so that you're done with it. And then when you get your book, you can concentrate on that, because this book, I call it the killer, because inside of it, when you're reading this, I did not pick a text that is, for a freshman. This is a high level text because you're my colleague. So you are taught in here like a reading scientist and called a reading specialist. You are leaving this program with a BS, and you are my colleague. I do not want to work next to you and you not have a good grasp. Doesn't have to be great because you're new, but a good grasp of what these things are. So if you don't have your book, I don't have a way to get it to you.
Is the Writer's Workshop?
I don't know. Figure something out.
Is the book available on the library website?
Sometimes the university makes me crazy, but stay away because we also love them and we care about each other first. Your health is the most important thing. Then you've got all your kids and your family, right? That's the most important thing that's going on right now. So if something's going on for you and you would like to let me know about it just because you're worried about it, then just let me know. No, Christella, it's just the Reading Problems book, which is the book that you paid for that should be shipped to you. It looks like this, although yours has a different kit on the front, I think. They change it every year or two, so you have to pay more money for it. This one's the older edition. And then you have the Writer's Workshop book. This is a short one. So there's just those two books. All right. So hopefully you guys have a great week, and I will see you on Thursday when you have questions. Thank you for coming in for this hour and a half. Next week we're going to be we're going to finish up formal and informal. Right now we've learned about formal assessment, diagnostic, criterion reference, and norm reference. Okay, those are your three. You should know what those three are and be able to draw a bell curve. Talking about what the problems are with high stakes assessment, we shift, we have limit our curriculum, those things. So when you leave, that's out of these 2 weeks, that's what you need to remember and understand. When you come back, we're going to be finishing up that. You also have a test in week 4, so that's the catch up, and that's I got to find my book because you will definitely want your book as you take the test. And that way you can search within the book for answers. You're welcome to use anything that you have to help you on that test, okay? The goal is that you understand what's on the test and can find the answers or the research in order to find the answers. All right, I will see you guys on Thursday. It's been fun. Hopefully this will go up, be rendered, and be online for anybody else in just a little bit. Oh yes, and Laura reminds me a little bit. Please go in and subscribe to my YouTube channel. It'll be helpful to you. I'm going to start posting some other fun stuff for you guys to do, especially to get involved with your alliance. Okay, I got you guys. You can
Dr. Wilson.
board, but you made it. No.
Dr. Wilson.
I can see it.
Are you
Right, guys,
me?
have a great week. We'll talk to you guys later. Bye.
Dr. Wilson.